Hello, everybody, and good afternoon. We're very pleased to welcome you to the Workplace Pride's Connecting Members Videos series. And today we have Young at Workplace Pride that's going to be giving us a very fascinating webinar. So I'm very pleased to introduce Joost van der Sande, one of the board members of Workplace Pride, Young at Workplace Pride, to take it forward. Okay, Joost, thank you very much.
Thank you, David. That was a very quick introduction. Welcome, everyone. Maybe to briefly introduce all of us from Young at Workplace Pride, so a couple of the Workplace Pride members that you all know are here, but maybe not all of us. So we have Hannah Rowan, Ali Bak, Steven Kienhorst, and I'm, as David mentioned, Joost van der Sande. And together we're the program leads of Young at Workplace Pride. In today's webinar, we want to focus a little bit more on what the future of LGBTI plus inclusion looks like in the workplace. And we got a little bit inspired. It's all linked to building up towards the online conference that's there, and where we were also thinking, okay, how to talk about this particular theme. When preparing, we got also a very nice quote, and it was already in the introduction as well, where it was actually Ali in our group who met somebody with 20 years of working experience, and said to her, you know, our generation was fighting for basic rights, and actually your generation, the younger ones from this moment, are expecting them. And that made us think, okay, hey, this is interesting, because this triggers a perspective, a difference of generations on thinking about inclusion, and that's what a little bit what we want to explore today. So again, with a little bit of an introduction, or I'll give a bit of an introduction to trigger some ideas, and then we will take it on further, where we break out in two groups. We've just tested this, and it should work with this Zoom functionality. To split you into groups of people with 0 to 5 years or even no working experience, and 5+ years of working experience. And we will also subdivide ourselves as program leads. And then the ideas within the sessions that we want to discuss a little bit amongst ourselves. Okay, how do we see future inclusion in the workplace taking place? What do we need for that? And so we take a bit of time to reflect and discuss on that, and then at the end we come back to the main room, and we share also the perspectives of the different groups. All this is part, as I mentioned, to prepare a little bit for the online conference in June, where we also intend to share in more detail our findings. And for example, one group which is a little bit harder for us to tackle here today, but which we'll definitely want to include, is also those that have not started joining the workplace, so particularly the student populations. Okay, what do they expect from future workplace inclusion? So to move on to the context and the content of the topic. So the question is, what do we expect from our workplaces in the future? How do we expect them to be inclusive? Is the use of policies and symbolism, is it enough? Is that a strong way to work with it? Or do we rely on stories, on role models of those LGBTI executives that made it to the board of the company? Or do we actually need both? The reason that we're posing this question is that for a lot of years, there's been a lot of focus on rights, and by introducing formal policies to ensure these rights. However, inclusion is also much more about day-to-day culture, by what all of us actually experience in the workplace. And just to give you a bit of a thought experiment on this, so we probably seen the example. I'm just taking an example that many of us probably know, that the Dutch Railways, the NS, they changed their policy. I think it was a couple of years ago, maybe last year, to address the public from dear ladies and gentlemen to something which is dear travelers. And whilst in itself, this is, I would judge this as a very positive sign and a very positive measure. The question is this enough, or is this it for sustainable inclusion? I mean, in the end, inclusion is also very much about what you experience in the workplace on a day-to-day basis. It's about being able to participate. It's about being invited to dance, so to say. Not just being present, but also being invited to be part of the dance. And so, yeah, the question is a little bit, is focusing on these kind of policy changes, is it going to do the trick? Or to put it otherwise, does this really influence your day-to-day colleagues with whom you are invited? Are they inspired by these kind of measures? Do they change their behavior? I think what is important that we question ourselves: what do we need in the future to guarantee sustainable inclusion? Is it these kind of formal elements, or do we need to go deeper? And what can, if so, what can we do to make us all feel included? So what we want to do, as I said, we want to split you into 2 groups. And please, if all of you in the chat could give us an indication in which of the 2 groups you want. So one group is 0 to 5 years of working experience. The other group is 5+ years of working experience. And if you can write it in the chat right now, which group you would like to participate on, then Ali will be so kind to split us in the different sub-meetings. We will take approximately 30 minutes, we said, but we'll see a little bit if that's, I think that should do the trick looking at the time.
Hey, actually, send a message if you have 5+ years of experience, and then I'll just default everyone else to 0 to 5 years. Sorry, thank you.
That's even smarter. Thanks, Ali. Yeah. So those with 5+ working experience, please let us know. And we will take approximately 30 minutes for the breakout room session, where it is really trying to map within these separate subgroups, how do we see future inclusion in the workplace taking place, and what do we need?
I first of all moved over here to do a master's in social policy, and then for the past 2 years I've been working at a small NGO in Utrecht called the Access to Nutrition Initiative. And in terms of diversity and inclusion, there's very few kind of policies. There's a few mentions of inclusion within kind of the more overarching policies of the organization, like the HR policies, but so it's a little bit disappointing, like kind of coming in and hearing that, but I've kind of found that there's a lot of scope for, say, for example, for me to kind of bring in my own ideas and kind of give maybe recommendations to the organization, because there's only about 15 of us, so it's hard for them as well. So I kind of I'm really interested to hear everyone's experiences and the takeaway of this webinar and the online conference, because I think that I could actually kind of initiate some change within my own working environment, which I find quite exciting. So thanks.
Just a follow-up question on that, I'm really curious. You said that you feel that you have the scope and the kind of environment to bring your own ideas. Do you feel that those ideas are listened to and then further actioned, or is it more just kind of trying to create the conversation? Like, kind of which stage are you at, would you say, in that process?
Well, in general, I think because it's such a small organization, an NGO, and we actually are in a pretty good position in terms of funding, and I think in general, if any colleague kind of wants to bring in an idea, it is often actioned, and kind of that's my impression, that like it is a very open environment, and I've always felt very comfortable to be kind of my own self there. So I do think that it would be followed through, but I just kind of feel like I need some more kind of tools to figure out how to do that, or how to approach it in the best way.
Yeah, I mean, that's super interesting. Does anyone else who's here, just want to introduce themselves and let us know, so we have an idea of what size companies we are working for, or whether people are still students, and what they're using to look for different signals of inclusivity. And
yeah, I can go next. I'm Ashish. I work with Philips in India. So I joined Philips because internationally they were doing a lot. In Netherlands, they sponsor the Pride Parade and everything. But in India, the picture was quite different. The sexual harassment policy was only for women, so we recently changed that to include all the genders. So that was a good step taken. I told them, at least let's have a small pride parade within the office campus at least. So we did that a few months after I joined. But at the policy level, yeah, I'm still facing challenges. People are still afraid to use the word LGBT in an email because India still is a little conservative, I would say, and they expect that employees might get a backlash, like Philips might get a backlash that, oh, how can you support this community? Because until last year, it was still illegal to be gay here. So there's still a lot of fear within people here to um, talk about homosexuality.
Yeah, thank you. With the new laws that are in the country at large, have you noticed a shift within the perception within Philips itself, or is that had that kind of community existed without those formal policies as well?
Internationally, the community was there, but after I joined, I had a word with the diversity head, asking that what have you done for the LGBT community at least, because you have done fab for women, fabulous work for people with disabilities, but what have you done for the LGBT community? He said nothing yet. We were waiting for someone like you to tell us what we can do to be more inclusive. So that's when we started doing pride parades. We changed the sexual harassment policy, and now we're looking at further steps as well. We now include same-sex partner benefits as well, even though you cannot legally marry here in India, but you can still be partners.
Yeah, that's really great. And that's a topic that has come up within my office quite a bit, is when we have parties or when we have events, whether people can only bring their spouse or if they can bring partners, because that has major implications depending on where in the world you are and how comfortable you are.
Correct. And also, most of the offices don't have like a gender neutral washroom, so we're trying to work on that as well.
Yeah. And anyone else? There are 13 of us in here.
Take it from here. Well, my name is Remco, and I used to work for a consulting firm that is quite small, so we were only with 150 employees. And then there is no budget yet for any HR manager or diversity and inclusion in particular to drive LGBTI inclusion specifically. So I started it myself a few years ago to raise that question, and then like help my colleagues to become aware of their unconscious bias, for example, by hiring someone to do training about that, and then take it from there via like baby steps at the time to challenge the norm. And at a certain point, I think our company has been progressing towards a more gender balanced and less binary organization, also according to dress code, for example. And nowadays I work for myself through my company called Corporate Queer, where I try to help companies specifically to work on LGBTI inclusion. And mostly, I actually wanted to call it SME queer, but it's not as catchy as corporate queer. But I definitely want to help the smaller organizations where I used to work for as well, because WorkplacePride is already doing a lot for multinationals, but I see a huge gap towards smaller companies that have difficulties to translate that, or even to see the urge to do anything about this topic inside their company.
Yeah, thank you. That's super interesting. I hadn't actually considered the dress code aspect, and I think part of that is I've worked for multinationals. Do you think you could say a bit more about that and how dress codes impact? Was the company you were at quite strict on dress codes? Like, I've been able to wear sweatpants everywhere I work, so I
preferably identify myself as queers, which gives me like a more fluid interpretation of both my sexuality and my gender. But I assume that I'm mostly perceived as a cis man by the environment that I'm in. So they expect me to wear a suit in a professional environment, but that doesn't suit me. So I don't feel comfortable in that. And then I got like sometimes questions about my outfits, that it was too flamboyant, or that they couldn't send me to their clients, etc. And then I raised the question, but is it because I'm a man? And yeah, if you were a woman, you could easily wear this. And so then I raised the question, what is like professional clothing, and how can we also include non-binary or trans people? Because not everyone is cis. We live with 7 billion people, and we cannot put everyone into boxes, you know?
Yeah. Does anyone else have a company that has a very strict dress code like that? Sorry, those of you who are shaking your heads like are very, very tiny. So.
Yeah, maybe if I can say something, because well, I work for PwC, but it's also I work in the consultancy branch, and it's just as Remco said, if you're sent to a client, you know, you should look presentable, I guess. So I guess it's mainly about what they think the client would think is professional. But I do have, for example, a colleague. She's well, she's female, but you know, she's never worn anything else than a suit or pants, and that's actually, I think, more accepted because it's just easy for a woman to wear a suit, and yeah, that's what she feels comfortable in. She would never ever wear a dress in her life, but I think the other way around, it's more difficult, I would say.
Yeah, that's something that I've actually heard quite a bit from friends that I have that work in consultancy or in more corporate environments than I have, where particularly my male friends have been upset that they still have to wear suits when it's, I'm sorry, I don't know Celsius well enough to estimate temperatures in that yet, but when it's like 90 degrees Fahrenheit, so really, really hot like it was this past summer, and they still have to wear a full suit, they see that as unfair when women are able to wear dresses and clothing that is a lot more temperature pleasant, I guess, or a lot more comfortable. Yeah.
I was working with this IT company called Wipro before this, and this one day I wore heels to work, and my manager was not okay with that. He's like, "Can you please change that right away?" And especially in India, definitely, it was even more tough. So I did have to go back, change, and come back.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And then where is everyone else from, and what are some of the situations you've faced yourself or that you would look for in a new company? Because I mean, obviously right now there is a lot of insecurity in jobs, and so it's not unrealistic to think about what you would look for in the next company you join. And what do you find comforting that you like about your current companies, if you do find that, and how can other companies be more inclusive to attract young people to work for them when this is all over?
Maybe if I may jump in, maybe also to add on the previous conversation, to give another example. So my name is Christophe. So I'm French, but I'm actually based in Geneva. And I was working for Japan Tobacco International, and they used to have a very strict dress code. And they recently, just like a few months ago, they kind of open it and release it. And for me, that's also a good aspect to look at in terms of inclusion, not only for LGBTI community, but for everybody, so that they don't have, I mean, men to be in a suit with a tie or a woman with a dress and high heels. So, but you could see that even though they have opened it, it took some time that people can really come as they want, as long as it was kind of clean and, you know, at least clean dresses, I would say, but they really open. And I think that's really part of to have a better inclusive environment. And then the other thing is, that's why I also joined this part, because okay, I'm much older than most of you, but it's also because I'm part of the Autre Cercle, which is the French LGBT association working on the workplace, and we want now really to focus more also on the young, because we
we have this project that we did last year on role modeling, on role models, and now we want to now to focus on the young that have their first job, how they can also be a role model, and is it enough, as it was mentioned in the introduction today. So I'm also looking to see kind of a brainstorming on this topic, and because we are also thinking of what we should be doing now to attract and what matters for the young. Yeah.
You know, it's really interesting, especially the idea of having younger people be role models. I know that was a fairly new concept when I moved to Europe from the US, where I had peers in my study program and in my internship who were role models within their communities in a way that was not as prominent in the US. And I would love to hear more about that younger role modeling that you had just mentioned, because in my mind still there is an age hierarchy which I'm trying to overcome. But that is, what do you think young people can do to be role models?
I mean, that's a challenge really we are facing, because so last year we didn't have a category for young people, but we wanted to. So this year we are putting this new category, and we are really facing issues to find actually young people that want to be visible and to be shown as a role model. So, and actually there's two, we're trying to focus on women, because it's also, we see that there's more men than women which can be visible, and on the young. So we don't have solution yet completely, but we see in fact that we have opened for the people to be candidates, and okay, we found people for the leader LGBT category, for the allies category, we have people, but for the young category, we have a very small number of young that want to be. So we still don't know, I mean, how we can change that. We still don't have solutions. So that's why I wanted to attend actually this call.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of our goal too, because obviously Hannah and I, as well as Joost and Steven, who are the other young board members, really want to make a difference. And we face the same challenge where all of us have full-time jobs, and this is what we do because we're passionate and we care. But it is difficult to understand outside of our own perspectives without having these larger group discussions. So yeah, with everyone here.
We're trying to contact a lot of alumni business schools. I mean, people that not only LGBT1, but all of them, to try to talk about our project and so on, to try to see if it can inspire some of the students to join and to be a model. But it might take some time. So maybe this year we won't have a lot, and it will take another year to have more, and another year, because people will still hesitate to be so visible, because of course they will be afraid of their career. But
yeah.
The more people visible we have, the better, because then it will make it easier for the next people to join the workplace. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's part of why we split this discussion into two groups, because we want to be able to compare the experiences of young people versus more experienced people. And I know even just, sorry, I also talk a lot. Anyone else can feel free to jump in. Clearly, I like the sound of my own voice. But like when I lived in San Francisco, the girl I nannied was openly out at 12 years old. And that was something I had never even dreamed of being. And her first boyfriend was a trans boy. And that to me was so like amazing that it wasn't even she never had a coming out moment. She never had the same type of situations that I did. And that's a 10-year difference.
I think sorry if maybe I want to add something to this. My name is Freek. I'm from COC, which is the Dutch LGBT interest organization, but I also work at the university. So I have this kind of double role, and a lot of the things that you mentioned now is also what I'm seeing in universities. So where I teach, for example, there's a very, at least to me, welcoming environment, but then you also have to teach in front of a class. So you have to perform a role that's much more restricted. You're much more judged by students in class. And at the same time, and this is from my experience at the CUC organization, one of our biggest projects is happening on high schools, and we find lots of young people that are willing to take up this role model for our campaigns, for example, inspiring other young people. But then we have a hard time motivating, activating students, university students, for example. So that age is much more difficult for us to get in touch with. They do organize a lot of things, of course, and there are lots of student organizations that hosts events and that bring people together. But I do see also this this kind of tension that you are mentioning, some of you. Yeah, when you start your career and things are perhaps less certain, you're in short-term contracts, so it's difficult to stand out. And yeah, I think that is something that we see, especially from the age of university students and up, and much less so in high school students. And part of that's probably also because of the fact that they are together in groups, they see each other every day, so they can foster these bonds of friendship that might make it easier for them to be visible and to stand out. But it is a challenge, and I'm also curious what others think about this.
Yeah, so can I just ask how many people here are still in university or have graduated within the past 6 months to a year? Anyone? No one? All right.
I am a PhD student, so I kind of like in the limbo between being at working and being a student.
Okay.
I think the topic of visibility is very interesting because on the one hand, you do need to create a stage or a platform for people also at a young age to be visible. And I think that WorkplacePride could take there a stand by, for example, initiating an award for like young talent or anything, for like potential overall model of the future. I think that would be cool. But on the other hand, I also totally agree with Freek saying that it should be safe. Also, like, I feel very flattered now to be in this online room with so many other open out LGBT professionals. But on the other hand, I would also like to create a safe space, and it's difficult, more difficult online, I would say, that also people that do not want to disclose their name, for example, that they could also participate in this discussion. And that's difficult with these functionalities like Zoom. And also if you have a WorkplacePride organization which is built around members, and with all due respect, I'm sometimes not invited to the events because I do not work for an organization that is a member that pays money. So it's difficult to have everyone around the table all the time.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. My current company is not a member of WorkplacePride. And so for the larger events that Young at WorkplacePride is not actively a part of, I'm also not included in a lot of those communications, which is one of the goals of Young at WorkplacePride, because to us, young people might not be part of those larger corporations that can afford to pay the fees, but our voices are still important, and they are what is driving the future workforce. That's the whole point of this conversation, is what will the future look like? So thank you for that feedback, and we are definitely going to use that to open up our mailing list and make sure that our communications are a bit more accessible. Yeah. But yeah, I agree with the importance of anonymity, because while it is really great to be able to be out and we want to create those safe spaces, it can be scary in places where it's either illegal, or if you are not publicly out and you don't want your family or coworkers to know for whatever reason, Obviously, we don't want anyone to go through that, but the reality is that people do. And so we want to make sure people can find the communities that they can join and be a part of without feeling scared about being forced out. And I know, like, when I was looking into my undergraduate universities, one of the reasons I went to San Francisco was because I knew that was an inclusive place to be. If any of you have ever been there, it's wonderful. I highly recommend it. And that was something that made me nervous coming to Holland, because I hadn't really heard much about what the LGBTQI community was like here. And I knew about Pride in Amsterdam, but that's a big party. And that in itself does not symbolize being included outside of that singular weekend. And I was really happy that, like, it is really inclusive here, and I've been very happy and like my life here. But for people who are not living in the Netherlands or San Francisco, how are you experiencing searching for job opportunities? Or when you were going to university, how did you find those communities within your larger communities, and what was that support system like for you, and how do you wish that could have been better, or was it perfect and flawless and all of that, which, you know, some people have great experiences the entire time.
Maybe I can tell a bit of my experience. So I'm Gonçalo. I'm from Portugal, and I moved to the Netherlands 3 years ago, and I did my all studies in Portugal, and I was not out when I was in university, and I really didn't see any that really, if there was a movement. I knew that there was a group that met in a room, but as someone that is not out, I didn't want to go and see going into the room while those meetings were happening. And this was really, it was not no big anything. It was not the issue that was talked about in my university or even in media while I was studying. And then I finished my studies. I was out for myself, but not publicly, workplace, colleagues, family. And then I moved to the Netherlands, and I moved with my boyfriend at the time. And I mentioned it to my advisor here, and I think she noticed how awkwardly I was talking, and the first thing that she said was like, "Oh, don't be like that. We are all very happy for you." And that was really like a switch moment. And from that, like that moment on, I was out. So it's really, and then being here in the Netherlands, and you just see posters everywhere, Pride, workplace, flags on top of the building you work on, and there's just a different feeling to it. And I wish it was like this where back home.
So, I mean, something we've heard before and that you've also just touched upon were the importance of these symbols of inclusion, and whether that's posters or having groups that are well visible or flags on your office building. I know IBM switched their normal flag to one that has the Pride colors that flies year round, at least in Amsterdam, that's how it is. And that was a really massive moment, especially for a company like IBM that has such a global presence to make. Is that something that you, like, to everyone in this chat, is that something you find valuable, or do you see that as more of a commercial kind of appropriation of Pride? Because I've seen lots of discussions on both sides of that.
As someone that is recently out and still is a bit worried about if I'm really welcome in the space, seeing those symbols really triggers on me the like, okay, here I can be myself, or here I can be I can be comfortable, but yeah, when I see it on some product, the flag, then I like, yeah, it's nice, but maybe it's nice for the workers of that brand, but I don't know if what are they going after? Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So we have 2 minutes until we're finishing this breakout session and going back into the larger group. I know this was a really short session and that not everybody shared because, you know, it can be difficult to share. If you have anything else that you want to add or say, please do so. Otherwise, I'm going to close the breakout room, which then gives you 60 seconds to join the main room again, where the young team was going to kind of debrief what's been said in both.
Maybe just one point. Then I think the symbols are really important, as you're also saying. It's nice to see that if you're just out and you see a flag. But I think we should always be very careful to see and to make sure that those symbols are then backed up and combined with actual policy change, for example. Otherwise, it's just cherry picking and picking the nice things. And I think we're now at a stage, at least here in the Netherlands, where we can say, okay, it's enough of cherry picking. Now, if you want to put out a rainbow flag, you also have to come up with these and these measurements to, in a sustainable way, improve the situation of LGBT and others in the workplace. And again, then maybe linking up to what we said earlier about creating a safe space. There's also people that are not out. They also need to be safe, and therefore LGBT groups might not be the safest place, or might be a very scary place. And at least what I've noticed in high schools again is that the campaigns and actions that we do that include everyone. So maybe you're familiar with what we call Purple Friday. So the success of that is that it is really easy to support that, and you don't have to become part of an LGBT group, or you don't have to subscribe or enlist yourself in an LGBT organization, and that makes it, I think, accessible, and therefore is able to include many more people.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if such a thing might be possible in the workplace.
Yeah, I think that is really dependent on the policies and the types of policies that companies create and how far along they are in those. I know at Uber there were a lot of policies that were quite inclusive within just the terminology used, having gender neutral bathrooms in some of the offices, obviously not all of them globally, but there was even a movement and designers who were happy to put forward and share what worked in those offices. And then places like the company I'm at now, there aren't even, there are a lot of challenges to overcome in the fact that that is not something deemed important. And their concept of inclusivity is not saying something derogatory. Which is obviously a larger issue, because if the only reason you're not saying something derogatory is because you have someone who's finally out in your office, that means that you have a massive cultural issue rather than an inclusion.
Yeah, to add what Frank said, a lot of companies in India are also doing that. They walk the Pride Parade, but none of their policies are inclusive. They are at all the LGBT events, even when their own policies are not that great. So they're just using it as marketing.
Yeah.
This is Jan Willem. Sorry, I'm late into the party because I was late in other calls and I had huge problems to enter the Zoom because of security reasons by Heineken. But I completely support your view that, well, first of all, I think visibility is very important. So I really do commend everyone who is taking part in Pride and also being visible. And I think that's the first step. But of course, it needs to be substantiated also internally with policies, etc. And it really is a journey also for us. We are still in quite an early phase, but we're really very serious to also look at policies and see where we can adjust and change things, but also being aware of the cultural sensitivity, because we are a global company in many countries where LGBT is either, let me say, a taboo or even it's not being allowed by law. So we need to find a way of navigating there. So last week, we have an inclusion and diversity circle of ambassadors, which is inclusion and diversity in the broader sense. But we got 15 minutes during the call to actually explain the work we do as an LGBT group. It's called HOP, Heineken Open and Proud. And also to get their interest and to see, okay, what kind of role can they play in their conversations with many local management teams, HR directors, etc. But it's absolutely a journey.
Yeah, thank you.
So, hi everyone. Glad that you could join today. My name is Steven Kienhorst. So I'm one of the co-chairs of the Young at Workplace Pride program. We've done some very exciting stuff over the past couple of years, actually. We had a really interesting session earlier this year as well. And next to that, I work at IBM. And at IBM, I'm also co-chairing the internal LGBT chapter. Very cool stuff going on. And I'm actually excited to hear what you feel about like where we need to go with workplace inclusion. You've all been part of this journey already a little bit. And I'm excited to hear what your thoughts are on the future of that.
So what I will do is that we had a bit of trouble of sharing our screen, but what I'll do, so it's I presume that most people are done typing, and if not, please go on still a little bit at the back, at the end of the document. I think what would be nice to do is to just share a couple of the highlights. I'll just point them out. And for those people that say, "Hey, this is my input," we'll be curious to hear a little bit more on your thoughts. Let me start with one. So I see one of the thoughts here. It says, "Okay, let's go beyond diversity and inclusion to equity, for example, equal pay for work of equal value." So I'm curious who typed that and who would be able to share their thoughts on this perspective.
That was me. Sorry. Hi, my name is Nane Ukajatnzad. I work for the ILO. I'm a program support officer on non-discrimination and work for equal pay for work of equal value. I think the recent D&I initiatives are very, very commendable. It's a step in the right direction. However, research time and time again shows that LGBTI people, or not just LGBTI, or on other grounds as well, when you look at gender, there's a gap in equal pay. So it'd be interesting to look at the size of those gaps. I think there's been multiple research on that, but we can't just go on equality or inclusion. It has to go on equity as well. And looking at policies that promote equity, for example, equal work for equal pay, looking at parental leave, looking at family responsibilities, in workers with family responsibilities, and other such policies, and making sure that they're not just equal but equitable as well, because not everyone from our community needs the same. They may need more or different types of policies that are adjusted to them. So yes, inclusion is great, but when certain positions, or also within the structure of the organization, when certain positions, managerial positions, are only held by cis European men, or you're looking at or just by men, that needs to change too. So yeah, going beyond the whole sort of inclusion dynamic, but looking at equity too. I hope that's clear.
But if I'm trying to understand your wording, you're also saying, well, hey, it's nice the way you present it. So the way we presented it, we sort of said, I'm not saying that rights is fully finished, but we've had a lot of campaigning for rights and equality in that respect, and we said, well, inclusion is sort of the next frontier. So are we able focusing on formal policies, will that still do the trick? But basically you say, yeah, okay, sorry guys, but this work's not finished yet, and hey, you can talk about inclusion, but when you have not fixed the equality gap, is that how we should understand it, or am I
yes and no. I think yeah, the work hasn't finished. The work has only just started. I think we've got a further long way to go. It's how we then take these policies at the workplace and then make them national law, national legislation, so that, for example, you've got social protection measures in place as well that cover the LGBTI community, that protect us all, and not just, you know, in one part of the world, but globally too. So yeah, I think the work, so just to sort of correct, yeah, you are right, the work has only just started, and I think it's got to go beyond sort of getting LGBTI and people in the workplace seen and recognized, but also ensuring that they're treated, they're given, the policies are more equitable, not just equal, but equitable as well, giving them that, you know, what else they need to ensure equality. You know, there's this famous picture of 3 people standing on a box, and you've got equality, what the difference between equality is and the difference between equity is. And whereas one person may need more to ensure that he or she or they are on a level playing field with the rest of their counterparts. Yep. For example, trans people coming into the workplace may need more training and support because they have missed out on years and years of education. So can the workplace provide that?
Yeah. Okay. Clear. Thanks for your point. It's very clear. Steven, you want to do a next one?
Yeah, sure. So the next quote on here is actually, or the next thought is, there is always a gap between policies and practice, right? It's not set and clear that you overcome inclusion issues. The writer says that we need to discuss this and improve as long as organizations operate. So basically saying we're never done. And lack of inclusion impacts negatively on overall performance by people not being able to give their best at work, or not attracting right people into the department or to the organization. So I'm not sure if there is anyone that wants to elaborate a little bit on this.
Yeah, that was me. Hi.
Mm-hmm. Hi.
Actually, I'm a founder of Inclusion Sensei. So my practice, it focuses on the workplace inclusion and in business. And so, sorry, I'm looking at my 10-month-old child so that she will stay calm. She screams, that's the baby. But anyways, so yeah, my thought is that there's always gap, and then there's, I think most companies have policies in place, but it's the people who practice the policies, and there's always a gap.
Absolutely.
And so the behaviors in the work environment changed drastically in the last, I would say, like 10, 15 years since I came into workforce. Mm-hmm. At advertising agency 20 years ago, people were still smoking. You won't believe it, but people are still smoking, and that's a big no-no now. And female were pretty much treated as a secretarial or kind of a second level to men, and that doesn't happen today. So when I look for like 10 years and 20 years, which is like kind of far, 20 years seems like a long time, like ahead, but then the norm today would look completely not norm in probably like 3 years and 5 years. So we need to focus for our workplace inclusion today, but also in the future, what it's going to be like in 10 years. And we need to look forward to the future, and we have to do it now. Otherwise, nothing's going to change. And all the people who've, lived and then changed the world for my generation, I feel like we need to do this for the next generation, for the companies to succeed and survive. And
absolutely.
Yeah. So Yeah, sorry.
I totally agree with that, with you. And this is also why we set up this session, right? To think about a little bit like, where do we want to go? How do we see the future of workplace inclusion when we see, for instance, more queer identities entering the workplace? How do we cope with that as employers, right?
I'll move to so I won't read it out completely, but I think the main point that's being made here, that it's important for younger generations to work together with those that have been active longer with LGBTI workplace inclusion. And actually, COVID-19 is a good trigger to look for the change that's possible. That's what this person is saying.
Yeah, actually, I feel very strongly because it was the topic of this session anyway, and also kind of following up on what Yuli said. That this is this is the moment that we're going to determine what's happening in the future. And recently, somebody on another webinar, and that person happens to be in this call, brought something to my attention very much, and that is that now is the moment that organizations really show what they're made of. Now is a time when all the talk about diversity, all the support is coming true, because once we get out of this crisis, our community and businesses are going to have to start thinking about how are we going to react differently to each other on a lot of different areas. And I think it's an opportunity for our community, to start modeling the future. And the crisis is the springboard to get that done. And I so hope that the younger generation and the older generations can work together to form this, because we cannot do it on our own. We have to take our knowledge of what's happening in the future and what's already happened in the past and model our own future.
Yeah, so we should grab this moment where all the organizations show their true colors. It's
absolutely.
Yeah, very clear, very clear. Steven, you want to take on the next one?
Yeah, so I was actually really intrigued by another one I saw. It's not exactly the next one, but it's a little bit more below, which says more role models who feel free to express themselves. This also gets back to what David just mentioned with more showing your colors, right? So this should not only be corporations showing their colors, but actually also the role models. And maybe it would be nice to open up a little bit to hear some people, their thoughts. So if you have a view or an opinion on role models who feel free to express themselves, I would like to open up the floor for that.
It will be intriguing, Steven, to see how the COVID-19 and the more being home and more working with web meetings, how we can be that role model, right? In the day-to-day world, you can wear a t-shirt and be a role model, or have a kind of some sort of showing at least who you are, what you are, and that you are, let's say, gay or whatever. I mean, but in the new world, it will be intriguing to see how you can be a role model that is sort of visible, because you are less visible, right? That's not easy. I like the idea. I think it's really important, because that's the only way to make sure that we drive the message home to people.
Yeah. So
but it'll be fun to watch how we can be role models. I will watch a lot on internet to see how people do it, just for fun, because
yeah, absolutely. So what you're saying, I think, has also another valid point, right? So it is maybe more complicated to be like visible right now, but on the other hand, it's more easy to be more personal right now, because everyone is looking into each other's home. You see pictures, you see books, you see like more of a person, right? And I don't know who wrote this specific one down, but if we talk, for instance, about the future, more queer identities entering the workplace, I'm not sure how much accepted it currently is to have those people be themselves and have real out role models that are showing their queer side. And it's not a specific question to you, Dominic. It's
but you're right, because I know a few that's queer kind of role models in my mind, but I would not know how the office will react if they come like that. I mean, that's the other thing, right? And I don't even talk plant, I talk office, the easy part. Plant is different.
Exactly.
No, I think the best thing we can do is be a role model, and also make sure that, and my message was the next one, which you skipped, is that we try to drive the message home to all people that there's something in everyone, for everyone, in being inclusive, because we all have something to hide, we all have our weak sides, and yeah, period. Back to you, Chairman Stephen.
Absolutely, but yeah, valid point. So any others with thoughts on this topic specifically, and maybe also how we can actually empower people to be like better role models, also looking at the future workplace.
Yeah, can I say something about role models? Because I think to be a role model requires a bit more than only being openly gay, LGBT, or whatever. But it's also really making a point of it. And that means to speak up, to speak out, and to lead, especially if you are in a management role. And there is a flip side in that. You can also people invite to be a role model. Maybe when I long ago started to lead the LGBT group at TNT, I did so because colleagues of me invited me to do that. So there is also a responsibility of people really to invite people to think you may become a role model. And normally they will not do that out of themselves. But if they are invited, probably you have a better chance. And that is really showing more than only your identity, but really make a point of it.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, Paul. So it is really like about inviting role models and providing the opportunity, providing a stage, helping them a little bit in order to become a better role model. And this is not only for role models, right? This is also for allies in the workplace. I think this also holds for them. Yeah. So keeping a little bit of that more or less activist behavior and supporting that.
I don't have to say anything. Everything is said about this. This morning I saw a TED.com movie from Willful of Blindness. And I think it's important to be yourself, to express yourself, even if you got some enemies by that. So create your own fan club or your own enemies if you want, but be yourself and make the difference for the next generation.
Yeah, that's well said. It's okay to make enemies. I noted that down. Yeah, that's good. So maybe, oh, David, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, making enemies is always, I guess, part of the risk. But it's always also good, I find, to package whatever you're saying in a very constructive way, so that it's not just getting up on the barricade. I mean, there are plenty of good people doing excellent work with that as well. But making sure that the dialogue is, that you put yourself in the other person's shoes and help them understand why you're asking what you're asking. That's what I've always found very effective. And you know, if you put it in the terms of we want to create something better for everybody, it's usually much more effective. I mean, that's what we found with Workplace Pride when I was working at ING, et cetera. It's just always, it's a bit more of a human way of approaching it.
Yeah, David. Absolutely. I'm going to integrate a little bit different point, and actually I see two statements which intrigue me a little bit. So what I see, if we bring it back a little bit also to specifically to the topic of inclusion. So what is interesting about inclusion, so Paul is writing here also, he says, well, we have to reach out to LGBTI workers beyond the office environment, so also in parts, so maybe in, well, if speaking for my own organization, working in a hangar or in the baggage handling environment, which is difficult, and combining that a little bit with a statement, it's quite a long input, but if I summarize it well in the document, somebody who says, well, actually what is important is that we need to send the message to allies and to everybody in the company that there's something in it for all of us. And I think it sort of comes back to the same point that inclusion, you have to have the question, okay, what's in it for me, or what's in it for all of us? And I think what we've been maybe doing a lot with with inclusion is that so far we like today again we're speaking very much in our own community, but also making the bridge and saying, hey, actually an inclusive culture is also there for you and for everyone who is maybe part of the majority. Is anyone who wants to share a little bit on this on these 2 points?
Yeah, maybe if I may.
Yeah, go on.
I think we have made a lot of progress in getting LGBT inclusion in a lot of workplaces. And if you see the growth of WorkplacePride and of all those LGBT groups in companies, then a lot of work has been done there. But what I also see that it's mostly confined to offices and to highly educated and highly and more than average paid workers. So that is, I think, still the easy part of LGBTI inclusion. And I've worked for some companies who had large workforces outside the office, deliverers for mail, for van drivers, more industrial environments. And there it really still has to start. And that's a lot more effort. And I think if you talk about a workplace for the future, I think it should be ingrained in also operational management, because it has a top-down element, but it really has to go to every work floor. And unfortunately, the majority of workers is not in the office. Maybe that sounds a bit activistic, but I think it's important for companies. They're still the same business case. And we really should have that dialogue with management to see that this is also important, although it's much more difficult than what we have done so far. But this is really one of the strains that we need to lead.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. Yeah. Do we also have the person who wrote in the Google Docs this point about the inclusion is something for all of us? It starts with inclusion should be a behavior that's embraced every day. Policies are a foundation, but people are the key thing.
That was mine. That was mine, and we do have that issue in the company. And I do see some really good examples outside the Netherlands, and look even between tribes in Jordan and the plant tribes. Yes, not
yeah.
I mean, we see the same issues with tribes and other stuff in HR. So to me, inclusion is behavior. We should be a role model. But the biggest issue is our allies are not seeing why we should make it a big point, right? We have achieved what we have achieved, something like that. And that's not true, because when you look again at COVID-19 and all the young people getting hit, I mean, so yeah, I mean, and I was not lying to Steve. I'm trying to now find out and reset also myself how I can do more and also do it with this kind of media and be more like a role model. Because frankly, I mean, and Paul is totally right about plants and about other people, but I do believe, Paul, that at least if you look at the story from PostNL years ago, there are some good spots, right? We have some good examples, but it is hard to get people to just quote Paul, overpaid people. I mean, that's maybe easy, but no, for me, it's not being a role model. And I want young people also to be a role model. And maybe the asking that was said by Paul is a good point. Asking it and giving them a stage and giving them some sort of training or coaching or whatever. Maybe that's a good way. Because there's no way everyone in the world will try to be inclusive, right? The world is full of, I mean, most people are by default going back to family, their own, what they should do. I mean,
Can I just add something?
Yeah, sure.
So it's Marijn here. I think it's also good to consider the inclusive corporate culture and how that translates into people working remotely, like we do now, working in different locations, etc. I think that's the challenge, and I think that's a bit what Paul was also referring to. You know, people are indeed working in a warehouse or on streets or at clients. how can you make sure that the working culture is very inclusive for everyone, that people understand how to act, how to be inclusive all the time? And I think what we all experience now is how we all experience the engagement, our own engagement with our organizations, but also whether the organizations engage with us. Are they connecting, how they connect with us on a personal level as well as on the professional level? And maybe, you know, we can think of some good ideas. And like David says, use this situation as well to have a bit of a different perspective and think of some new ways to engage and define what best practices are. What do leaders do? What do role models do? What are small things we could do? What are big things we could do? What do we expect our organizations to do? I think those are important points for us to consider.
Yeah, absolutely agree, Marijn. And since we're almost running into our going back to the main session, we won't be able to tackle all the different points in the Google Docs. But if we try to make Steven and I a bit of a summary of what we've just heard, I think if I summarize a couple of the observations that I have, so then we say, okay, so inclusion, it is important, it remains the topic, but we are not completely done with the rights and equality and not equality in itself. I think you used the word of equitability. So having equal opportunities or access still remains important, and there's still important steps to be made. We see still the usage of role models, but as a role model, you can be more activist about it. So you're actually not just a role model for people who identify, but also a role model visible for people who are part of the majority. I think we said, and it's okay to make enemies whilst doing so. I think we said COVID-19 is actually an opportunity, not only to bridge generations, but also, as Marijn just mentioned, to see at this moment how organizations are working to cooperating, interacting with their employees in a different fashion. And also think about the physical aspects and the different environments where we work as people. So not only in the office culture, which is the easy environment to work on inclusion, but also put on the agenda those parts of the organization where people are still not feeling included at all, but where it's definitely a theme. And we can talk about tribes in Jordan or operational departments in PostNL, but I think people understand what's the area where we need to look for. Lots of good input already, and then we haven't even done the full Google Doc. So thanks a lot for all your input. I think we're going to be back in the main room for in just a bit. So I'll just inform the main group that we are ready to go back. And if there's anyone that still wants to add something or correct to my summary, please feel free to do so now, whilst we're waiting to be put back in the main room.
While we wait, can I just share one image with you guys?
Yeah, sure.
See, this is the homework that my 4-year-old received from Basis School. So you see a boy and 3 girls, well, female. I immediately didn't like this assignment. What I saw was 1 boy and 3 women. And then my daughter said, no, I want to work on this. Let me do this. And she circled this lady instead of a boy. And she said, she's sleeping. That's what she saw. It's not something that I saw. What I saw was 1 boy and 3 women. And what she saw was 3 awakening people, and then she's sleeping. So in terms of role model, you don't have to be in the management team or a big, C-level job. Anyone can be a role model, I think, around you. And then my brain is more tainted than the 4-year-old. And I didn't see what she saw. That's something I wanted to share.
Very true.
I think, yes, sorry, Joost. I think this is amazing to share because I hope everyone can see the picture. But it basically shows that maybe we should not learn from our executive, from our managers, but we should actually go to kindergarten and learn from them.
So if we're looking at the 5+ group, we saw really, so inclusion, there's a lot of work to do, and there's, oh, I see I'm not visible, so let's try to show myself again. Yeah, here I am. So what is important is that we don't completely lose sight of the rights and the equitable and the equal opportunities part, because it's not completely done. Maybe in some parts it's finished, or the younger generation expects them, but still this is not over. So we should not. So that's maybe your first thing to take out for ourselves. Furthermore, we had quite some talk about role models. So role models actually still play a very important role moving to the future. However, the next step for role models could probably be to be more activist, more active about being a role model, so that you're not only a role model for those who are in the minority group, but you're also a role model visible to the majority group, and be a force for inclusion there. And whilst doing so, don't be afraid to make enemies. That's a bit part of the job. When we say, we talked a little bit about the current situation of COVID-19, which is actually an interesting force for change, or an opportunity to start changing, not only to look at the bridge between younger generations, but also because this is the moment where companies show their true colors. So how do they interact with their company, with their employees? How do they care for them? How do they interact with them? And so it's also an interesting moment to observe whether that inclusion is actually taking place or not. One thing that we also said is, well, inclusion, we've already done a little bit the easy part, and it's me maybe being illustrated today with us. We stay very much in the higher educated corporate office environment, but there are and also very much still within our own groups. However, we can expand this. Inclusion needs to be there for everyone, it's not only a theme for LGBTI people, but it's also a theme for straight people, for majority people who have maybe another sense of minority, or maybe even not. But inclusion is something for all of us, so I think that's an important statement. And secondly, to expand this from the physical office environment to a hangar, technical area, operational area, shops, whatever. Places which are maybe a little bit less visible to headquarters, but where their inclusion is maybe even more needed, or as hard needed as in other places. Those are more or less the points. So perfect. Can everybody hear me and see me? So what we had quite an interesting discussion, and of course, it's always times way too limited. Let me try to summarize a little bit what we discussed and what we said. So if we're looking at the 5+ group, we saw really, so inclusion, there's a lot of work to do, and there's, oh, I see I'm not visible, so let's try to show myself again. Yeah, here I am. So what is important is that we don't completely lose sight of the rights and the equitable and the equal opportunities part, because it's not completely done. Maybe in some parts it's finished, or the younger generation expects them, but still this is not over. So we should not. So that's maybe your first thing to take out for ourselves. Furthermore, we had quite some talk about role models. So role models actually still play a very important role moving to the future. However, the next step for role models could probably be to be more activist, more active about being a role model, so that you're not only a role model for those who are in the minority group, but you're also a role model visible to the majority group, and be a force for an inclusion there. And whilst doing so, don't be afraid to make enemies. That's a bit part of the job. When we say, we talked a little bit about the current situation of COVID-19, which is actually an interesting force for change, or an opportunity to start changing, not only to look at the bridge between younger generations, but also because this is the moment where companies show their true colors. So how do they interact with their company, with their employees? How do they care for them? How do they interact with them? And so it's also an interesting moment to observe whether that inclusion is actually taking place or not. One thing that we also said is, well, inclusion, we've already done a little bit the easy part, and it's maybe being illustrated today with us. We stay very much in the higher educated corporate office environment, but there are, and also very much still within our own groups. However, we can expand this. Inclusion needs to be there for everyone, it's not only a theme for LGBTI people, but it's also a theme for straight people, for majority people who have maybe another sense of minority, or maybe even not. But inclusion is something for all of us, so I think that's an important statement. And secondly, to expand this from the physical office environment to a hangar, technical area, operational area, shops, whatever. Places which are maybe a little bit less visible to headquarters, but where their inclusion is maybe even more needed, or as hard needed as in other places.
In the 0 to 5 age group, a lot of what we talked about were the need to move beyond just symbolism and actually have policies that back up that symbolism, as well as what types of policies are needed. So we talked about sexual harassment policies that had only been written to include women who are sexually harassed, as opposed to anyone who can be, or not having gender neutral bathrooms, what dress codes are enforced or expected within different organizations, and then looking into the different age groups that are hard to get in touch with. So sorry, I am saying that not entirely correctly, talked a lot about the difficulty of getting in touch with university students, while high school students are actually a lot more approachable and willing to be visible and push themselves forward as role models within the community, and how important it is to have role models at different stages of people's lives. We also talked about the importance of having safe spaces, not only in physical spaces like offices or universities, obviously once we get back from COVID, but also having safe spaces online, and the ability to enter a space and maintain a sense of privacy. So someone brought up the fact that within Zoom you have to put in your name, and that might not be something you're entirely comfortable with, but you're still required to do even in a safe and inclusive space. And so trying to figure out and navigate a bit more of the complexities that exist within the virtual world as well. And yeah, as I've mentioned before, looking into like having sustainable policies that are more comprehensive than just waving a pride flag or giving out rainbow stickers as a means of showing your support when it can generate income or generate profit. Yeah, so that was, sorry, we're a bit short on time and I'm trying to summarize my scribbles. But yeah, that was what our younger group talked about. We will be reaching out for more detailed explanations, because obviously 30 minutes is a great amount of time to get a conversation started, but not nearly enough to fully grasp everything that needs to be said. So if you have any contributions you would like to send in or discussion points, feel free to send those to info@workplacepride.org, or reach out to Hannah, Yost, Stephen, or I on LinkedIn, and we will be able to pass those messages along and add them to the conversation and presentation that we're getting together for the conference in June. And I will hand it over to David. So sorry, we have 1 minute. Hopefully that's okay.
Okay, that's fine. Listen, thank you very much to the team at Young Workplace Pride for arranging this webinar. It's been very insightful, I think, for all of us. For me, it's wonderful to see a lot of familiar faces that I haven't seen for a while, and a lot of new faces as well to help spread this message around. So again, this was the third webinar in our series. The next one will be next Wednesday at 1 o'clock, and that will be hosted by Booking.com. The one after that is about the United Nations LGBT Standards Toolkit that Workplace Pride has developed. That's on May 13th. And then the following that we have scheduled is on May 27th, will be Tech at Workplace Pride. So be watching the calendar on Workplace Pride's new website, look under activities, and also we'll be sending around invitations. So thank you all very much again for taking the time to participate, and we hope you'll join us for the upcoming webinars as well as the the online symposium, we're calling it now, on the 19th of June. So thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thanks everyone, bye.
Bye.